Okay, hi everybody. We'll get started now. My name's Sophie. I'm the Professional Development Manager at English Australia. Thanks for coming along to this afternoon session about blended learning course design in practice. And thank you to our presenter, Yvonne Newell. Yvonne works at Monash College, where she's an ELICOS teacher, and she also has a keen interest in learning design. She's currently undertaking a master's in digital education and design at Edinburgh University. Thanks for presenting for us today, Yvonne.
Thanks very much, Sophie. So today my presentation is going to be on blended learning and specifically how I've adapted and implemented some of the curriculum into using Google Slides. So today, the outline, I'd like to just talk about some challenges that I faced with the shift to synchronous learning. I'm going to move on then to talk about blended learning in the digital context and what that means when we have removed to the face-to-face, the conventional sense of blended learning. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the community of inquiry framework, and I'll be applying that to Google Suite and how I think Google Suite has enacted the three presents according to that framework. And finally, I've created a presentation, a slide deck with some practical takeaways and instructional videos of how you can implement some of these activities in your own practice. But before we begin, I'd like to just show you a short video just outlining how I use Google Slides as lesson plans. And I'm just going to share my screen. So hopefully you can see that one now. So just a bit of context. There's a mash, this is a very videos mashed up together and they're just sped up really quickly. But it's just to give you an overview and a brief understanding of how Google Slides could be used as a lesson plan. So the first clip here, it's based on reflective writing, and I'm going to be working with the group, kind of shifting through the lesson plan. And you can see here that we're working together to collect feedback. So the students got a similar slide in their group activity, and now I'm just working through it with them, and I'm just asking different students to identify the answers, highlighting how they identify the correct answer, and just inputting that into the table on the right-hand side here. So you can see it, on Google Slides, it can include a lot of information. The next slide deck here, it's a bit of a bigger slide because each student has got an individual slide to work on. They're all the same, and it's just getting them to answer specific questions on homework and vocabulary learning. So while they're doing that, I can monitor each slide very, very quickly and easily, and I can add some comments and give them feedback to check in with them. So really easy to kind of jump in and monitor and assess their performance. And I think using emojis is a really effective way to build a sense of rapport and relationship with the students. So you can just see me adding lots of comments and emojis here in this one. This one is the post-it wall. So I really like using post-its. You can use any shape and just make a copy for each student in the class. And in this particular activity, students are just choosing one post-it and they're answering 3 bullet points. So you could use it as a concept check or reflective activity too. In this activity, I'm in another breakout room, slightly smaller this time, only 3 students. One student has shared their screen, and you can see that they're working together and trying to identify specific mistakes, and they're having a lot of fun while they're doing this. So they're highlighting as they're going. So again, it's really easy to see. And finally, the last one, I've just again used the post-it notes, and I've made 3 sentences as a reflective activity, but this time I've just used the thumbs up and thumbs down emoji just to check to see whether they understood something or not. So that's just a brief introduction of how I use Google Slides in my own practice and how they can function well as a lesson plan. So I'm going to just move on and just talk about some challenges that I have faced with teaching online. But before I share mine, I'd like you to just maybe think about challenges that you have had experienced. And if you could write them in the chat, your ideas, and we can just compare and see if you had similar issues. So if anyone at all has any had any experience or any challenges, just write them in the chat and we can compare them. Yeah, so internet connection, having time management, yes. All right, refusal to turn on cameras, that's a big problem as well. Keeping up the pace of the class, reading the room and monitoring, okay. So very interesting, very similar issues that I have experienced as well. Motivation, engagement, and checking progress. Well, that's fantastic, because I will hopefully show you some things that have worked for me, and maybe you could implement them in your own class as well. So for me, one of the greatest challenges was navigation and navigating across different learning spaces. We've had the LMS, Google Drive, Google Docs. It can be a maze. So even for me, it was really challenging, and even for the students as well. Like many of you, I had difficulty in measuring the learning and the outcomes, and also trying to support students when you can't see them or you can't see their screens really easily. I found it a little less dynamic compared to face-to-face, so engagement also was a little bit of a challenge initially. I also found it really difficult to support collaborative learning, just using Moodle and the RISE modules. And also, like somebody else had mentioned, time management. I found it really time consuming setting up a lot of those activities, especially because of the navigation. So for me, I had to consider, what did blended learning mean in a synchronous environment? For me, when I did a little bit of research on this, I found out there was a definition, and it characterized synchronous blended learning as using different technologies to support synchronous class discussion, problem solving, collaboration, and interaction. So I try to use this time to try and reconfigure and reimagine how I could use technology in such a way that it could support all of these things. Because when I started teaching online first, I found that the technology was just simply not supporting this. So I want to introduce to you the community of inquiry framework. So this is a framework that it has been widely used by many institutions in a blended learning, or specifically an online context. So this framework is based on John Dewey's practical inquiry model. And so it basically stems from social constructivist theory. So the idea that students collaborate, work together, and they construct their knowledge together. So there's a big emphasis on collaboration and community. So within this framework, there are 3 presence: social presence, cognitive presence, and teacher presence. And where these 3 presence connect and they overlap, and when they are enacted, that's when you can create an educational and meaningful learning experience. So for me, I feel that Google Slides was helping me to enact these 3 presence. So social presence is defined as students' ability to participate within the community and also be able to project their own self. The cognitive presence is students' ability and the extent to which they can engage and co-construct knowledge. And then the teacher presence is composed of 2 elements. It composes of design and also the orchestration of the other 2 presence. So the teacher is guiding the students through the processes of online learning. So I've basically used these or kind of modeled Google Slides from these 3 presence. And I'm going to just talk about how Google Slide could or has the potential to enact these 3 presence. So just to confuse you, I've made another color wheel, my own color wheel. And I'm going to talk specifically in more detail on these 3 aspects. And then the yellow part here will be something that you can look at when you go away and look at some of the tips and tricks to see if anything is useful or if something that you want to learn you can implement in your own practice. So I'm not sure if you are familiar with Google Suite or Google Slides. I know it's popular in many institutions, but we use it widely at our institution. It's really easy to create materials. It's really easy to share. It's really easy to organize. And it does promote a good way of communicating materials as well between teachers and also students. It's got a wide range of applications. My favorite ones are docs, slides, and drawings, but there are many, many more. And I really believe that as Google Suite, the applications that I'm going to talk about, they have the pedagogical affordances that helps to support more collaborative learning. So for me, I had to navigate across Moodle and I had to navigate across Google Drive to try and repurpose and repackage the materials into slide decks. So I used Google Drive like many other teachers in our institution, and I organized them by week. I just think that's the easiest way. I think my students found it quite easy too. And within each weekly folder, all of the materials for that specific week live inside there. So you can see here, for example, week 13 has all of the lesson plans for that week. So I was the Thursday, Friday teacher. So you can see that there's 4 slide decks and an extra folder. So I would usually have approximately 2 slide decks per lesson. And depending, it might only be 1, but there would be maximum 3. I found, and I think my students found as well, that this helped them preview. So some of my students were good for getting up early and they would log on. They could easily log on to Google Drive and find the lesson plan for that day and just kind of skim through it and see what is coming up. So they were well prepared. And I think it was also helpful in reviewing the learning materials too. So let's focus on the social presence and how Google Slides specifically can enact a social presence and really kind of drive engagement and promote a sense of community. So we should care about creating this type of presence because according to Norman, cognition and emotion are tightly intertwined, which means that designers must design with both in mind. So students' social presence and how engaged they are has a direct impact on how they perform cognitively. So it's important that we try to promote this sense of social presence, especially when it's often a very foreign thing to them. They're unfamiliar with studying online. So I think it's very important that we do that so they feel supported. So I think that Google Slides effectively supports both synchronous and asynchronous collaborative learning. And it also supports the development of new literacies. So students often get kind of learn a lot of digital skills as well, just by, my lesson plans, I think. So I'm going to talk a little bit about interactive slides and how they can promote the co-creation of knowledge, and also in constructing maybe more purposeful and more enjoyable learning activities. So I'll talk first now about interactive slides. So a lot of my teachers or my colleagues at work, they will ask me, how a template, what template do you use? Unfortunately, I haven't figured out yet how I create a template. I've tried, but it's not worked effectively, or it's not saved me any time or made me any more efficient. So I'm just going to show you a general formula that I use. So if there is an interactive collaborative task, generally I structure it like this. So this works really well for any sort of reading practice or any sort of short writing task. I think it would work quite well with these types of activities. So generally I would put brief instructions at the top. So when students are in the breakout rooms, even if they weren't listening closely, they still know what they need to do. They can just reread the instructions in case they're confused. I'll include the text here. So on the left or the right, so in this case, I've chosen the left. I'll copy and paste the text from the Google Doc or from Moodle, paste it in here and just reduce or adjust the size if I need to. On the other side, typically I'll create a table. I think tables are very helpful in keeping the slides organized and helping the students know what they need to do. So I'll put the questions on the left and the answers on the right. You just need to consider how much detail the students need to write. So if students require a lot of text or a long, lengthy answer, I would just highlight this entire text box and I would change the color to white so the background of the slide isn't interfering with it. And I would also just reduce or increase the word size depending on how much text that they need to write. And I think don't be afraid to move your slide out if you need to, or sorry, your table out, and maximize and using this dead space. So you can see that I'm not presenting or in present mode. I'm keeping my lesson plan in edit mode, and that's how I deliver all of my lessons. I never present them. I always leave them in edit mode so that students can contribute to them and they're building the lesson plan with me. So that's my generic formula. It's nothing too amazing, but it's nice and simple. So instructions, text, and table. So if we go to slide 10, we can see that students, we can see examples of the interactive slides here. So you might not be able to read it on my screen. Perhaps I should just include that in the chat so you can see more clearly. But essentially, I've created 5 slides. They're all the exact same. I've just labeled them group 1, group 2, group 3, and so on. So after I design my first slide, I will just duplicate and create as many slides as I need to my lesson plan. So in this case, I've made 5 groups. And really easy way to just duplicate it is just by pressing Control and D after you've created one. So you can see that it's just got a label, it's got brief instructions and a short paragraph or text. So not too much detail, but very concise. And I think this kind of activity is quite good for an activity that might take 15 or 20 minutes. Another way to make things more interactive or engaging is by setting up, by having fun with the way you set up group work. So at the beginning, especially at the beginning when students don't really know each other, I think it's a good idea to try and get them into interest groups or match them according to other students who have got similar interests. So again, I'm using the post-it notes, but you could use a table or a table or another shape and write some text on the shape and ask them to fill in their names if this description describes them. And if you're using Zoom like we are, Zoom has got a really good feature now where it allows students to choose their own breakout room. So what I do if I'm creating an activity like this, I'll just give each post-it note, each shape or each table a name, and then I'll rename the breakout room and then open them, and then students will have to go and choose that room. So again, it's a nice little icebreaker. They can go into that breakout room and they can start talking with other students who like similar interests to them. So really easy, just adding shapes. You can double click on the shapes and just add text. I have just added a tip here. I recommend adding text before students start writing and then just adjusting the size of the text. Because again, if you don't adjust the size, sometimes it can just overflow or overfill on the shape. So just trying to keep it a bit more tidy by adjusting before. Another way to set up breakout rooms or groups is by driving more engagement by using things like wheel spinner. So wheel spinner, you can get them to choose something. Like in this case, I've chosen mystery doors. So these mystery doors are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and I have embedded another slide within each of these doors. So a really good way to maybe increase engagement is by embedding links to images. So for example, if I'm choosing this little fire emoji, if I press Control and K, I can post a link here, or I can select another slide that I want to embed to or map onto. So I think this is actually called branching. So I can just choose 13. So that means if the student clicks on that particular image, it will bring them to that particular slide. So it's a good way to, I think, increase engagement and also make for more of an immersive kind of feel in the lesson plan. So this particular activity, I got students, we spun the wheel, and then the students, they had to choose the mystery door that they wanted, and then each number would map on to a particular task prompt. So that was fun. It was a bit more engaging and really simple and easy to do. It doesn't take too long, especially with this short tip. So what was the students' perspective? Well, following my last class, my last cohort, we just finished, I asked them, got them to fill out a Google form. Unfortunately, I only had 15 students in the class, but it was really positive to see that students, all of them, found the lesson plans interesting and engaging. And when I asked them what exactly helped, what aspect of Google Slides they liked that made a positive learning experience, they all seem to appreciate the ability to be able to communicate with students or classmates and to do this quite easily. And some of them had mentioned that it even had promoted a way to think more deeply about things because they were probably more engaged. So it was all really positive feedback from the students about in terms of the social presence. Moving on to the cognitive presence. So Google Slides has the potential to be a bit more aesthetically pleasing, I guess, compared to Google Docs, because it allows you to easily embed different modes. So it really effectively supports multimodal learning. And it's really easy to do this, to embed and to include different types of multimedia. I felt like this also helps in supporting self-directed learning. So students, if you can embed links really easily, students are more likely to go and find the answer rather than rely on the teacher. So this really helped me save time in consultations, one-to-one meetings with students. I found that students had much less questions and I had to repeat myself considerably less. I'm very excited about this feedback aspect. So I'll be talking a little bit about multimodal feedback and dialogic feedback and how Google Slides can promote both of these things. And for me, the biggest one of the biggest challenges earlier was navigation. So I feel that Google Slides provides really streamlined navigation because there's much less tools required and it's all sits in one place. So it's supporting that, in my opinion. So in terms of multimodality, when I was doing a bit of research about multimodality in one of my recent assignments, I was focusing mostly on listening. And I found that by having bimodal feedback or input has been shown to effectively support listening comprehension and word form recognition. So I got this tip at a PD. I saw a teacher do it. They were reading out the instructions, and as they were reading bimodal input, they were highlighting the instructions while they were reading. And I think that was really effective because it means the students are less reliant on using their dictionary or just translating the text because they're listening to you and they're also seeing the word on the Google slide as well. So I think that's a really good tip that I learned from a teacher at a PD. Google Slide also allows multimedia to be easily embedded. Again, I think this is helpful in terms of comprehension and helpful in terms of increasing engagement. So really easily you can embed from YouTube, or you can embed from your Google Drive, audio or video. So if you just click insert, search from your Drive, or you search from YouTube, you can find something and embed it really, really easily. And I'll show you in a moment in the next slide. And finally, another tip that I figured out very recently was that there's fewer tech tools that you need because they're all in one place. So actually, Google Slides has a built-in or embedded dictionary. It works in both Google Docs and both Slides. If you press Control, Shift, and Y, it will generate a dictionary on the right-hand side. So I've been trying to encourage my students to avail of this, again, giving them less of a reason to leave the lesson plan and get distracted elsewhere. Interactive slides continued. So you can make worksheets or digital board games. And again, this might help to increase engagement. As I said in the previous slide, I just mentioned about embedding videos. So I've embedded a dice roll from YouTube, embedded it here, and now they have a dice roll and they can play this board game. So for example, if I'm the first token, I can just move this onto the board game. So I made these 4 little tokens just by inserting a shape and just adding color to them and having 4 different, one for each student. I also recommend that you maximize the dead space. So the dead space being on the side here. So keeping your Google Slides organized and keeping the content in one place. And I also recommend that this board game, if you can see, I can't actually edit this slide because this slide, I took a picture and put it as the background on my Google Slides. So you'll see background here. If you choose an image, you take a screenshot, you can upload it to the background. And that means that the students cannot edit or change it if you don't want them to change it. They can only move their token in this case. So that's been really fun. Multimodal feedback, so giving feedback in using different modes. I think I got this idea from another PD that I watched on English Australia. I forget who, I should have checked, but I forget. But basically, I have started recording verbal feedback for writing, and I'll do a short recording, I'll upload it to the lesson plan, and then I'll get students, I'll turn it into a listening and note-taking activity, and then get them to reflect using the post-it wall here. So multimodal learning feedback has been really effective in getting students to engage a lot more with their feedback and closely listen to it as well. So I think it's been really, really effective and has been shown to be developing students' creativity and critical thinking. Most recently, I've been using this type of feedback called dialogic feedback, and I'm really blown away with the impact that it's having with my students. So typically students are having issues with not engaging with their feedback because it's received too late, or they misunderstand, or they're unable to act upon it. So this study that I was reading recommends that students should initiate, if they're able to initiate dialogue with the teacher, they can engage with their feedback a lot more. So what I've been doing, this I think works better with Google Docs. So on Google Docs, you can add, rather than just using the error correction code, I write a lot of questions to students and try to stimulate a conversation. And I can do this really quickly by using the add comment button. So by adding a comment, you can add a comment and the student will receive an email and they can respond to your question. And then it will stimulate an email. When they reply to you, you will get an email and then you can stimulate a conversation with them. So it's been really effective in terms of getting students to engage more deeply with their feedback. And when I did the Google form and when I asked them for feedback, I was really surprised to learn that the feature of Google Slides that they most appreciated or they most found useful was the feedback function. So originally when I was giving a PD or when I was sharing videos of my lesson plans at PDs, I got a lot of comments about the aesthetics, the visuals, but I was really surprised that that was actually valued the least by students. And the comments, being able to comment and receive timely feedback from the teacher was the most useful from the student perspective. So that was really interesting. And I think that's something that we could all, it's really easy to do. You don't need to have much tech skills. You just need to add a comment and start a conversation with the students. So the last aspect, I'm nearly finished, is the teacher agents, is the teacher presence. And for me, a big aspect of the design on Moodle was that I felt constrained by the technology. I felt like a bit of a technician. I wasn't able to input or change or modify or personalize my lessons. So I really think that the teacher should be an orchestrator, and the Google Slides has allowed me to orchestrate the learning and design for learning and use slides and as opportunities for these learning experiences. So Google Slides has allowed me to adapt lesson plans and curate, I think, more meaningful, because it's allowing me to personalize my lessons. And I think it's helping in terms of improving engagement. So for instance, somebody had mentioned in the chat earlier about helping or managing the student performance and monitoring learning. So Google Slides has a really good function, better than Google Docs, because it's so much easier to find out how the students are progressing if you're using a slide per student. So instead of having separate Google Docs, if you've got a short writing task, you can make a Google slide, make one individual for each individual student, and then view all. So you'll see on the bottom left that there's a function here where if I press view all, I'm able to see all of the slides. And by doing this, you're able to see where the students are. So I know it's not very clear on this picture, but I can see little circles here. So I know that what they are doing and they're typing. Here, for instance, I can see 2 students are in this one slide. So there's a problem here because maybe one of the students has misunderstood. So I can easily pop into that slide, add a comment. So sometimes I'll add my comments down on the speech notes. And it's really funny, students will just reply back to me. And then I can resolve the issue really easily. And I think students appreciate, as long as it's not an assessed task, I think students really appreciate being able to go and observe different students' work, and it, you know, inspires them, and they're learning from each other as well. So I think it's been really beneficial. And finally, some considerations. So from the teacher perspective, it's time consuming. I won't lie, it did take me considerable length of time. But for me, I realized that I was really interested in learning design, and I've since gone and started studying it. So for me, I didn't mind putting in extra time and, learning all of these things, but it does require training, upskilling, and definite confidence. And I think the teacher, as I mentioned in this framework, the community of inquiry framework, the teacher is a huge driver of the other two. So the teacher needs to feel confidence in what they're designing. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. From the student perspective, students, we need to remember they're not digital natives and they cannot always use technology for academic purposes. So they require a lot of support. So again, the teacher needs to have confidence in being able to support them. When I asked students about some issues, there were common themes. They didn't like that students could accidentally delete or modify their work, which is completely understandable. So there's definitely pros and cons to that. One thing you can do is you can actually check the history. So if you check here, you can check the history and you can actually find out who is edited to, and you can restore a previous version. So that's one way around it. There was difficulty, somebody mentioned in the chat earlier about loading issues. So that's important to remember, that some students may have a low bandwidth. So you might not want to include things like videos. But in that case, I would encourage students actually to turn off their videos, because if they turn off their videos, sometimes that can make the internet work a bit more, make it work a bit better. And I sometimes will get another student to share their screen, so that student, if they can't load it on their computer, they can just read it off the other students clearly. And somebody had mentioned about size, so you can adjust the size by up and down. And that's basically my presentation. I have included, I know that was a lot of information in this, so I've made a practical take-home guide that has included some tips, tricks, and things that I wish I had known at the beginning of my Google Slides journey. I asked some other teachers to for advice or feedback on what they wanted. So these were some of the things that they had asked for advice on. So I've included some instructions on how you can do these things. And these are my references. If you want to read any more, particularly, I'd recommend the dialogic feedback. That's really interesting. But now I'll take some questions.
Thanks, Yvonne. There are already some questions in the Q&A, and if anyone has any others, please do pop them into the Q&A for Yvonne.
Just have to think. Okay. Somebody asked, can you tell us more how you created the mystery door activity? Yep, that was actually really simple. I think what I did was I just made a, if I could just, what I did was I just made a shape. I got a picture of a door. So I'm just going to draw, I would recommend just searching a picture from a door, but I'm just going to include a shape just to give you an idea. So once I have the door, I'll just copy them by duplicating them. And then you can either embed the link to the image, or you could, for instance, because the doors are the same color, I just included a number. So let's just put, oh, I think I inserted a word art. So I inserted a number. So I'll put 1, and that will give me the number. So I'll just change the color so you can see that. And then if you click on the number and you press Control, you can choose the link button or Control and K by choosing the image if it wants to work for me. Maybe not. So I'm just going to choose the link, and then you choose the slide that you want students to go and visit. So for example, if it's the first slide, you just apply. So that means when you play the spinner wheel, you choose number 1, and that will bring them directly to slide 1. That was the mystery door. Did you find any issues with students using different devices, students using iPad versions of slides? I didn't actually, because all of our students are required to have a laptop. So unfortunately, I'm not sure how it would work. I think I have had Google applications on my iPad, and I find them a lot more difficult to use. So I think they work a lot better with a laptop. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer that anymore. How do you create group slides for individual slides? How do you create separate group? How do you separate, group slides from individual slides? So the principle is basically the same. So for instance, if this is a board game that I wanted my group, that I wanted the students, each student or each group to have a board game, I would just duplicate the slide or copy it, and then just again change the title. So then I would say group 1, group 2, group 3. If it's an individual activity, I would just duplicate the slide and make 18 copies instead of just having 5, for example, or having 3 in this case. It just depends. So it really depended on the curriculum and what type of activity was required, and whether I thought it was necessary to be an individual activity or whether it was a group activity. For individual activities, I just recommend that rather than putting the group name as the title, so normally I'd put group 1, I would actually just put like name here and ask the students to find a slide. And if somebody else is there, move on to another slide and just write your name. So that means that students aren't working on the same slides. So I hope that answers that question. Have your students been here in Australia or overseas? I'm wondering if Google has been accessible to students overseas, in particular in China. Yes, so our students, in my last class, all of my students were situated in China, and the previous cohort, there was some students, I had a student in Japan, Thailand and Vietnam, and they were all able to access Google Slides, but they had to have VPN. So our institution does provide an offshore VPN, so that's the only way that students are able to get around it. So if you don't have that, then they may not be able to access it, which is unfortunate. Next question, I think this is the last one. Do you have any experience of Google Slides, or sorry, comparative experience of Google Slides with Microsoft Class Teams? No, unfortunately, I don't. I have used Microsoft Teams very briefly for a uni assignment, but I assume that they have similar functionalities. But unfortunately, we use Google Slides, so I haven't had a full chance to implement it, but I'm sure that they have very similar functionalities. And I think that's all of the questions.
Okay. Thanks, Yvonne.
All
Is there
right.
anything else you'd like to say before we finish up?
If anyone wants, you are more than welcome. I think everyone should be able to access the slide deck.
Yep.
And there's an instructional guide, and it does explain these details. So you're more than happy to just make a copy of this and save it on your drive. And hopefully it helps you and you can implement some of the strategies in your own practice.
Yeah, no, I'm sure people have found it really useful. It was an incredibly user-friendly presentation, which was packed with some brilliant ideas. I loved the board game. It was very authentic, and people are saying in the chat that they loved the door idea as well. And thank you also for including all of your tips and links and references, because it was really useful.
Thank you. Yeah, and I hope that you can implement them. And I think the board games and even the dice roller, you know, so many teachers really enjoy that, and really easy to do as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thanks everyone for your comments in the chat. There are some interesting comments going in there now about, you know, alternatives to Google Slides and different things people have used. So it's great to hear the different perspectives too.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we will share the recording and the slides with people tomorrow by email, as well as our link to download your statement of attendance for this session. So thanks again, Yvonne.
Thank you.